Well, political columnist and author Mark Steyn joins me now. Mark, it's good to see you.
Good to see you, Cheryl.
So one of the things about this part of the year is that Islam is entering into its holiest month of Ramadan. It's also known as a time we've seen in the past when radical jihadis encourage martyrdom. Do you think that this week's wave of attacks is the beginning of more?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back 16 years to the launch of the Afghan campaign, back then you'll remember that all the humanitarian groups like Oxfam were saying that the Americans and their allies should have a bombing pause during Ramadan, which was completely ridiculous. In fact, what we've seen since then is that groups like ISIS actually ramp it up during Ramadan and try to turn it into a very explosive season for those on the returning end. And just to go back to what that gentleman was saying a couple of minutes ago, that if we knew what he knows, we wouldn't sleep at night.
Well, he's
I've
the
heard
Homeland Security Secretary, so yeah.
Yeah, I've heard variations of that line now for 15 years from prime ministers and defense ministers and foreign ministers around the world, and it's constant. The last thing they all see before they go to bed at night is these little bits of chatter, little bits of plots here and there on the map, and they go to sleep and they have no idea till the following morning which of them are going to be the ones who get lucky and actually pull it off like this crazy guy did in Manchester.
That's interesting. Well, you know, it does beg the question for all of us, should we be worried here going into a holiday weekend?
I think you always have to be alert. I mean, I think you have to distinguish between kind of living in a permanent state of fear and doing what I think is the wrong thing, which is just taking it, which is what the Europeans are doing. We have people like the Mayor of London and the French Prime Minister saying, well, get used to it. There's nothing we can do. This is just a fact of life. And we shouldn't do that. We should actually be taking steps to ensure that there are fewer Manchesters and fewer Nices and fewer Brussels and all the rest of them, because they pick symbolic targets. These things are not accidental when they attack on France's National Day, or they hit a big female pop star, or they hit Sweden's leading department store. In a sense, they've got a big choice of symbolic targets and a big choice of soft targets.
Well, they have those all over the world. And, you know, I want to bring in something else that we've been watching, to Christians themselves being targeted overseas. Terrorist gunmen attacked a bus carrying Christians in central Egypt, Mark. They killed 28 people. They wounded 25 others. And it was interesting because earlier this week, President Trump had called out Islamic terror and the slaughter of innocent Christians during his visit to Saudi Arabia. So listen to what he said.
There is still much work to be done. That means honestly confronting the crisis of Islamic extremism and the Islamicists and Islamic terror of all kinds. And it means standing together against the murder of innocent Muslims, the oppression of women, the persecution of Jews, and the slaughter of Christians.
Well, so, Mark, do you think that there's a genocide of Christians that are happening that no one's paying attention to, or maybe no one's willing to admit to?
Oh, absolutely. And under the last president, he consciously chose to avoid mentioning the faith of those who were being targeted in Egypt and elsewhere. What's happening in the Middle East is these are the oldest Christian communities on earth. And it's actually quite shameful that in Iraq and Afghanistan in particular, that the Christian communities were all but entirely obliterated on America's watch. I'm not interested in ramping up the numbers of Christian refugees to the West. I mean, we'll do that if we have to, but I think what's important is to send a signal to these guys that we are willing to do what it takes to keep Christianity in the region where it was born. So things like what happened to these Copts, for whom things have got worse and worse since Mubarak fell, are not small things. It's not a question of letting them all flee to America. It will be a huge loss for the world if the birthplace of Christianity is in effect de-Christianized.
Yeah, I know. I agree. And especially just seeing the president go through so many of those historic sites. It just reminds you of the history there, like, as you mentioned. You know, it's interesting, back here at home, of course, we've had some commentary on all of this. You had Nancy Pelosi actually criticize the president for visiting Saudi Arabia. Take a listen to what she said.
It was unusual for the President of the United States to go to Saudi Arabia first. It wasn't even alphabetical. I mean, Saudi Arabia. Now, notice the previous 5 presidents, President Reagan, President George Herbert Walker Bush, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, and President Obama, 4 of them went to Canada first.
Okay, I'm not really sure what her point is. I'm sorry. It's kind of funny. Like, what do you mean?
Well,
sorry.
Well, I'm
alphabetical. I don't know where.
Yeah, I don't quite get. If we did it in French, Saudi Arabia is Arabie Saoudi, so it would almost be alphabetical.
Yeah, okay, good reason.
In fact, it's only way down the alphabet because the Saudis are like Trump. Trump names resorts after himself, like Trump Taj Mahal or Trump Tower, and the House of Saud named the country after themselves, like Saudi Arabia. But if you take the Saudi off, it is kind of alphabetical.
Okay.
If that's what she wants.
I don't know.
If Nancy Pelosi is proposing that we hand out foreign aid from A to Z and then bomb countries from Z to A, well, that's great news for Albania and bad news for Zimbabwe.
Okay.
But that's the system.
Serious topic. You're making me laugh. You can't do that. But here's the thing. You know, I actually was happy to see President Trump go to Saudi Arabia because if you look at what's happened in Syria, which is now bleeding into other countries around them as these refugees are fleeing, what's happening to Europe, the Saudis really have kind of sat back and not done much of anything. You know, this is their region. They're a country rich with cash, and they haven't done any. That's my opinion. I'm off. I don't know what you think, but.
Well, no, it's true. And if you look at, for example, this fellow's family in Manchester, it's easy for a Libyan to move to the United Kingdom and become a subject of Queen Elizabeth than it is to move to Saudi Arabia and become a subject of King Salman. The refugees in the region should be resettled within other Arab Muslim societies in the region. Saudi Arabia, I don't know whether they have a big, beautiful wall and got Mexico to pay for it or Israel to pay for it, but Saudi Arabia actually does an incredible job of keeping everybody out of its country.
Yeah.
And these wealthy Sunni monarchies, the Saudis and the Gulf monarchies, actually are the ones who should be bearing the brunt of the Syrian and Iraqi refugees.
Yeah, I agree. I've felt that way for a long time.